Let's go to the stock market and talk about what happened. So after DeepSeek was released and people understood what happened in DeepSeek, over $1 trillion was lost in the stock market. And that permeated from over 600 billion lost from NVIDIA, but also hundreds of billions lost in other companies. Why? The idea is that if DeepSeek is 93% more efficient, over an order of magnitude cheaper, then the idea would be that we need fewer data centers, we need fewer GPUs, and NVIDIA's growth rate isn't going to be what it might have been modeled to be. That's why NVIDIA lost something like 17% of its equity value in one day, which is the largest drop in equity value by a company in history. Okay, so I'm thinking about buying a Model Y. What do you guys think? So here, let me just tell you like my thought process. I was driving home with a friend from the airport, and he has a Model S, and I hadn't seen the latest FSD, and I was really impressed with it. I feel like having a car in the family that just does FSD could be super helpful. And as I'm getting old, I know this is going to sound super old man. Okay. As I'm getting older, I kind of don't like driving at night. So I kind of want a car that like I can just hit the FSD at night and not have to like pay as much attention. First, should I get a car with FSD? And if so, if I don't care about how much I spend, which one would you get?
Luxury. I mean, a brand new Model Y owner.
Yeah, I got a Model Y about a month ago. The FSD is noticeably really, really good. Like they added a new like V4 computer in there. That like the V3, like it was a pretty decent computer, like what I've been used to like seeing like with my like parents' car or with my friend's car. Like V3 is good. V4, it's a really, really good model. The thing I really hate about it is there's an internal camera that just like narcs on you. Like it observes what you're doing too much. I'm so annoyed with how much it like polices me about like, oh, we're turning on attention monitoring because it looks like you're looking to the side. I was like, come on, man. Like I'm paying for you to do a thing, not like monitor me and like watch me and tell me I can't ignore the road. Like what's the point? It is very, very good. I am of the opinion that like without FSD, I'm kind of default, just like if I'm getting a car, I want to have full self-driving, not just cruise control, not just like intelligent, like lane management. I want it to like actually be able to navigate because it's just like, it's so nice as a feature.
If you read a text message, will Tesla like tell your mom?
I hope not, but it's probably an option to be honest.
Like luxury.
Beta, what are you doing? I think it's just like, one, it drives really nice. So even when you don't want FSD on, like it like has good pickup, like it feels really good on the road. Like road noise is low, music is really good. It's just like the goddamn internal camera, man. Like I need to jailbreak my Tesla is what I need to do.
If you put on a hat and sunglasses, I've heard that it doesn't. Is that true?
Yes, the sunglasses work as a trick, but that's obviously, I don't know if it works at like midnight, you know?
Do you regret not waiting a couple of months to get the update, the refresh?
What do you mean?
The new Juniper refresh, like the 2025 Model Y.
The new body style. Yeah.
Oh no. I mean like I'm paying for the car on like it's finance. Like I didn't put cash down or anything. And my attitude is like, I'll use this one for like 3 or 4 years, just automatically like upgrade to like the next version whenever I'm in the mood to upgrade. Like weirdly like treat it like an iPhone almost, where like it will get old at some point, switch it out, move on to the new thing.
Okay, so now let me ask you this. Imagine you have 2 kids.
Yes.
Imagine you carry junk around for sports.
Do that already.
Which one do you get?
Model Y has been pretty good. I think like for the price, like I don't perceive that much of a value difference as a consumer between what the X is versus the Y is. Like doors are cool, a little bit of extra space is cool, but you can collapse the back seats fully. Like you can basically get like, if you want, I saw someone, I was parked at a Tesla supercharger spot a while ago, and there was someone driving a Model Y where he had an attachment on the back to carry a motorbike. He had kayaks on top of the car, and then like all of his like middle seats were folded down, just carrying like outdoor gear. So no kids, but like obviously like it's functional as an SUV. Like the Model Y will cover you for what you need. I've been skiing. I've seen people driving Model Ys up to the mountain, without like snow chains or anything, which is pretty cool too.
My hang up about the Cybertruck is I kind of don't like that everybody looks at you. I don't want the attention. And my hang up with the Model X is I don't like the doors. I don't want the Falcon doors. I want to just kind of like blend in. Like
I don't love the doors.
You love the doors? Okay.
I love the doors. I thought if there was any reason I was about to double the price of this car, it was because of doors. That's it. just doors.
You get more like footprint, right? Like you get more legroom in the back and
yeah.
And I kind of like the 6-seater configuration where you can like drop stuff in between the middle seats and like you just kind of have a little more, flexibility. It seems like. Yeah,
I mean, I just like, again, this is I think this might be a young 20-something question who's still counting like how many dollars he has in his wallet. This is like exit founder conversation where I think that conversation is a little bit more easy to have about utility of the Model X.
You mean you're not considering the Lamborghini Urus?
No, I think that's a 50-something-year-old luxury problem at the moment. I'm only waiting for the Lamborghini to come up with FSD, dude. It's not even like a money problem, honestly. It's just an FSD, clearly.
Yeah.
My only 2 cents here really is that having an electric car that is not a Tesla, almost every time I see an FSD update, it gets harder and harder not to get a Tesla because it does get so good, and like comparatively, all of the other kind of drive assists are just not. They're just not there. Maybe they'll get there soon. Probably not, but they're just not there. So to me, it does feel like Tesla and then everything else.
Mm-hmm.
As a slight tangent, did you end up getting the Rivian as well? Because wasn't there a time when you were also thinking about the R3 or the R2 or something?
Yeah, I put in like a $200 deposit on the R2, but I've heard nothing for like, I don't know, 6 months. So it's sunk cost, whatever at this point.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I think for the record, I don't think you'll be disappointed. Like my brother has a Model 3 and loves it. I think the only thing that I've heard that I agree with as a critique for the Teslas, and this is just kind of across the board, independent of model, is that compared to their kind of quote unquote luxury brand equivalent prices, the interior is not as nice, whatever that means, right? Like slightly worse materials, slightly, poorer finish quality, that kind of thing. But
yeah, I'm expecting, I'm used to the BMWs I've had. The same car, like I've had 4 of the same car, and I'm on the cusp of like, do I just buy another one? Because I'm so accustomed to it, and it's very luxurious. It feels very comfortable. Creature comforts, galore, but the FSD is really compelling. So those two things are competing factors.
Yeah, I find with the interior of the Tesla, like obviously like it doesn't need all the dials and like buttons that like I'm used to with like my old SUV, but I do really kind of miss, like, it's a weird aesthetic thing. I miss having like a traditional HUD. Like it's really weird to me to just like have all these flat, simple surfaces, where I think like there's something I really, really enjoyed about having my 4Runner, which is like a 2004 model, so super, super old. But something about just like, it has like all of these orange, like not LEDs, but like all of the console and like lights on it are just like this orange glow. So when you're driving at night, like the entire car like became cozier kind of like over the course of the evening as like you're driving. Like it was almost like a relaxing thing to be in that car, like driving down like a solo highway. Whereas like the Tesla, it's like, it's so functional, like it's so like utility designed. That's just like, I almost perceive it as more of a car, rather than like a thing to be in and enjoy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, your next update, the Model Y Juniper has the interior lighting package that you're describing. So
no.
You only had to wait 3 months.
I have been seeing like one thing that people apparently do, but I haven't seen a color that is like aesthetically pleasing for this. But underneath the, like in the leg space on the front, there are lights to just like help you see the brake pedals, whatever, and the passenger also has them. You can install, like you can switch out those lights and switch their color. I've only seen like pink and blue. If I could find an orange again, I'd do it, just like to give that ambiance again.
The Juniper Y has an RGB picker, so you can pick any color.
Damn it! Damn it! God damn it!
Next iPhone upgrade.
Yeah, next iPhone. God,
you're going to be on the every 2 year cycle now. They should just plan for that. They should make it
Honestly,
easy for us to be on that plan.
I look at it as like a subscription for a product at this point. Like I'm
Yeah.
happy with that concept. When you look at the cost, like I think for what the value of like full self-driving is, like I can go up to Seattle and not think too much and like not have to be super like energy exerting on focusing on the road, whatever, just like present, you know?
Yeah.
And that's like huge, especially like if I want to go do outdoorsy stuff, I want to go to Whistler, whatever. It's much more of like a task with a traditional car than with something
Yeah.
with FSD.
All right, Elon, give us an every 2-year upgrade cycle. Make it super easy for us. Just make,
Dude.
I just want to write one check or pay one subscription, upgrade my car every 2 years.
Dude, I'll start with a discount code, man.
Is your FSD that you pay for, Lakshay, is it a subscription or did you pay like increased sticker price on the front end?
So you back in the day they used to like make FSD part of the computer. So if you have the upgraded capable computer, like FSD was just baked into the car. I believe every car they're releasing now, FSD is a subscription. So in my case, I had like as a reward, I guess, or as a gift for buying the car, I got a couple free months of the subscription. But now I'm paying for it. But again, I look at that as like, okay, like that's part of just the price I kind of considered for the monthly subscription.
Well, once again, I may be wrong about this. I think the Juniper includes the FSD.
Oh my God. Stop.
Sorry, dude. Sorry.
Hey, that's we'll enjoy the RGBs in 2028, I guess.
Recently in the news, obviously DeepSeek has been gaining kind of tremendous attention. I think there's rampant speculation about what it means for the state of AI, what it means for startups, incumbents, large companies, medium-sized companies, kind of the whole nine. So I'll prime the audience a little bit here with kind of what is DeepSeek. DeepSeek, very, very simply, is a Chinese-based open source model that then their R1 version has demonstrated capacity and capability that essentially matches the O1 model, which is a quote unquote reasoning model from OpenAI. And there has been kind of speculation across the board. There have been, minor reports coming out of various parties, but essentially, if you believe kind of the dialogue that surrounds this release, it has been trained and running at a tenth to maybe even less cost compared to OpenAI. And so as a result, we saw NVIDIA and other tech stocks kind of reducing as much as 17%, which in the case of NVIDIA led to about $600 billion of market capitalization loss, which is seemingly unfathomable, but kind of a drop in the bucket as it pertains to the larger, I think, stock market shockwaves that could happen as a result of kind of this release. So happy to take this conversation in kind of any way you can. I've got some thoughts, but I guess Josh, I'll kick it to you first. What's your thoughts here?
The questions I've gotten are, is DeepSeek real, or is this some kind of fake thing in the news intended to drop stock prices? I'll answer that one right away. Yes, it's a real large language model. It's good. It's on par with O1. It's about an order of magnitude cheaper than O1 in output tokens. So this is inference. This is using this model once it's made. It's cheaper. Who's that good for? The good news is if you're an application developer, if you're building applications using LLMs, this is a way to cut your costs significantly and still get O1 level quality out of your model. Your data doesn't need to go to the Chinese government. It's not monitored in that way. You can download the code. It's open source. So side story, OpenAI was co-founded by Sam Altman and Elon Musk. Elon put in the initial money for the project with the intention that it would be, number one, nonprofit, number two, open source. So that was the original intention of OpenAI, and Elon named it OpenAI for that exact purpose, for it to be open source. Down the road, after Elon's involvement ended, Sam converted the company to this really complex structure where a nonprofit owned a for-profit. The for-profit raised a lot of money from Vinod Khosla and others to generate a lot of profit in return for the shareholders, and that would be what they used to fund a lot of staff and a lot of GPU purchases. So now OpenAI is effectively closed AI. It is a closed source large language model. Anthropic, by the way, which is another large language model company, is also closed source. So these are the two leading providers of AI in the United States. They're both closed source. You can't download their source code. Their weights are not open. Okay, so what is DeepSeek? DeepSeek is an open source large language model built by a team in China. And so you can download their source code. If you use DeepSeek via their user interface, then it has content moderation. So you've probably seen people do some searches for topics that would be potentially sensitive in China. Those are filtered because you're using their user interface. That moderation doesn't have to exist in the model itself. And so if you downloaded the source code, for example, if you used it via some of the Hugging Face models on Hugging Face, you can find DeepSeek iterations that don't have the moderation. And I believe the Perplexity team has hosted DeepSeek directly without the content moderation. So DeepSeek is an open source large language model. You can use it without any data going to China or the Chinese government. And it is a really good model on par with O1. It is reported that O3, OpenAI's coming frontier model, will be better than DeepSeek's R1. And so that's sort of the state of play that we're seeing is if you want O1 level quality, you can get it for an order of magnitude cheaper in your API calls. So this is pertaining to anybody who builds an application using AI, like the Scholar AI team. So your output tokens are far cheaper.
I think the thing I would really mark up for just a general user, like maybe someone who's not a developer, maybe not someone who's in startups, DeepSeek is making a model that's competing with O1. O1, when you're just interacting with ChatGPT, like odds are you're not interacting with the O1 model. But what it's doing is it's doing this thing called like chain of thought, where it comes up and kind of thinks out loud. And that's just in general been seen to cause so much of a model performance boost that this is the model that, like, if there's any possibility that we begin to use like AI to solve scientific problems, to help it do math. If you looked like 2 years ago, if you asked like ChatGPT to solve an algebra problem, probably would have failed. It's this category of models that emerged within the last couple of months that all of a sudden it's seeming possible that we could actually like have it reason, right? The reasoning model piece of this is not something that you're used to if you're just using the ChatGPT app. It's not one that, like, unless you kind of go out of your way to trigger O1, odds are you haven't experienced it yet. But it is actually like significantly jumping from like what LMs have been capable of, insofar as coding, doing math. And you can kind of assume that if we figure out the problems of agentic memory, if we figure out how to make like long-term retrieval really, really common, it's pretty safe to assume that we could toss like a table of really complicated data at one of these things and could actually come up with accurate conclusions. We're not there yet, but it's a very big step change, like this category of model, in getting towards the concept of an AI model that you can tell it to do a thing and it'll do it very, very correctly. And that thing is high stakes.
I think for me, the biggest almost surprise is the surprise in the response. So I am, especially given the kind of really accelerated nature of all of this progress with AI, I'm a little bit taken aback at how shocked the entire system seems by this release of a model. I mean, in theory, in practice, this is fairly well known and has been known for several months now, that once the foundation model exists, there are techniques, distillation, reinforcement learning, et cetera, that were used kind of in the paper that DeepSeek put out to mimic the performance of these frontier models. I think that there is some unique element of this release in the sense that it was, I think, previously thought that Chinese researchers, Chinese companies didn't necessarily have access to the largest, latest, and greatest NVIDIA chips. It's kind of my understanding that they've had access to H800s, which are essentially the functional equivalent of H100s for a long time. I know people, including Alexander Wang of Scale AI, are speculating that actually probably these teams have a lot more GPUs than they're kind of leading people to believe. I think even independent of that, again, I've been a little bit taken aback by how shocking this model release is to people, just in the sense that this felt inevitable to me. And even if you think that this was a greatly accelerated timeline to compare what would be expected, I think that's just kind of par for the course for AI more generally, which is these things are very hard to predict. We get new releases that kind of on a weekly or monthly basis that fundamentally change the way we're looking at things. So I don't know. I think that we're in store for O3 being released. That's going to be the frontier model. And then there will be some fast followers from a bunch of different research labs, the open source community, et cetera.
I think the way I look at it is, to me, I think that the surprise to me feels pretty earned, because my perception of open source, especially like something like a Meta Llama model, is that it's always been trailing and at best marginally worse than what is the frontier, like big enterprise solution, right? Anthropic, OpenAI were always in a different like category of conversation than Llama 70 billion was. Like the Llama at no point was like, oh, at a base value, I can use this to compete with OpenAI. I don't need to pay for OpenAI tokens. It was always, okay, I know this Llama thing is an option. I'm going to pay for tokens for OpenAI. I'm going to let them give me logs so I can figure out how I need to fine tune my Llama. And now Llama is suddenly competitive with OpenAI. I can turn off my OpenAI costs. It is, I think, the most surprising thing to me is the inference cost. There's a lot of reasons that go into that. Like we can get into that as it naturally comes up, but it's really fascinating to me that like we were able to get something that is beating the enterprise model in some cases, and it runs for so much cheaper, right? Whether you're using it on Hugging Face, whether you're using it through DeepSeek's API, and this thing was like it was not the original intent of the company, right? Like they just took what was happening in industry, observed, learned, and spent some time doing research, and like caught up all of a sudden. The distribution of like knowledge and the acceleration of AI, not surprising. There's a lot of interest in it. I'm just fascinated that they got something that could beat the enterprise premier model so soon and have it run cheaper.
Yeah, I think for me, we've gone through natural kind of inflection points in the training of these large language models and kind of the other, diffusion models that are related. The first inflection point was essentially the crawling of the entire internet, right? Once kind of those models kind of hoovered up that entire information data set, the next step was kind of this chain of thought, mixture of experts reasoning. So I guess my retort to you, let's say, is the maybe the methodology at which this team arrived at these insights is fairly surprising. I think I could concede that, and perhaps they have made some kind of more significant strides in the inference than maybe I'm giving credit for in kind of this general overview. But to me, I guess it just again seems intuitive that after something is introduced for the first time, the natural step of kind of innovation is efficiency as a next layer. And so we're going to continue to see, OpenAI and others push forward innovation for these frontier models. And then these fast follows are going to get, at least in my interpretation, begin and continue to happen.
Let's go to the stock market and talk about what happened. So after DeepSeek was released and people understood what happened in DeepSeek, over $1 trillion was lost in the stock market. And that permeated from over 600 billion lost from NVIDIA, but also hundreds of billions lost in other companies. Why? The idea is that if DeepSeek is 93% more efficient, so over an order of magnitude cheaper, then the idea would be that we need fewer data centers, we need fewer GPUs, and NVIDIA's growth rate isn't going to be what it might have been modeled to be. That's why NVIDIA lost something like 17% of its equity value in one day, which is the largest drop in equity value by a company in history. How legitimate is this? Like, let's talk about this. I'll give you my opinion, which is that I don't see any functional demand decrease for NVIDIA. Many of their contracts, they sell these GPUs on multi-year contracts. So for the next 3 years, basically every GPU that NVIDIA can produce is already spoken for contractually. And if it wasn't, it would be easy for them to go to any of their existing customers and say, hey, I've got one extra GPU. Would you like it? In my opinion, in 3 years, we're not going to have any GPUs sitting on the floor unused. It's just not a scenario that is likely. So in that world, even if our training costs go down significantly, DeepSeek was trained supposedly on about 6 million, but it required a whole lot of other distillation data and data gathering, perhaps from O1, perhaps from other models they've developed. So perhaps the cost is hundreds of millions, but that still may be significantly cheaper than the billions used in training by OpenAI. Okay, but let's just say, hypothetically, if it's an order of magnitude cheaper to train, and it's also an order of magnitude cheaper for inference after you've got the model, do we functionally end up needing fewer GPUs? My opinion is we still are going to be using every single GPU NVIDIA can produce. There will still be a shortage of GPUs, meaning there will still be more demand than there is supply of GPUs at their market price. That is my working assumption. And so I'll tell you what I did which is I bought more NVIDIA last week when it dropped significantly in price. And there's another company I bought, which is called Vertiv, VRT. They make cooling and power systems and cable for data centers. Those two companies I bought a significant amount of last week. I sold out of two positions. I sold out of Apple and I sold out of Microsoft.
I want to ask on the Apple thing, but keep going. I have a comment there.
Okay. I sold Apple because they're not a product company. They haven't released any meaningful new product that has caught the attention of the market. And they've optimized almost to a T such that I don't think there's really much left to optimize. They're riding a wave that started a long time ago. And it will take a new leader and a new mindset at Apple for them to fundamentally change. So that process will take years. So that's my assumption of Apple. Microsoft has a great CEO in Satya Nadella, but they have grown via acquisitions. They're a great acquisitions company. They're not a great organic product company. We don't see Microsoft Word dramatically improving and changing our lives. We don't see Excel changing and improving our lives. Those products are what they were. Anyone 10 years ago who jumped forward in future 10 years and opened Excel would see something basically the same, right? We don't have any expectations of the core products of Microsoft improving. They are what they are. And they print money on those products by bundling. They've got all these kind of financial tactics. They're a finance company, an acquisition company, but Microsoft is not a product company. The one thing I truly trust and believe in is product velocity and founder-led companies. NVIDIA is all about product velocity and is founder-led. Completely believe in NVIDIA. That's why I bought a bigger position.
I think the you commenting on Apple is really interesting because I guess in looking at the market reaction, so I kind of agree. I do think the way the market reacted was a little bit overblown. I do think it's fair to like look at it and like have a superficial reaction of like, yes, we'll need less GPUs, but I think that the sort of use cases we're going to cover as a result of base level reasoning becoming cheaper, it's just going to mean that like we're going to need more GPUs for more hard cases that this sort of thing unlocks by being open source effectively. I think that Apple's really interesting because regardless of what you think about like their current strategy, I think they've already tried an Apple Intelligence thing, didn't really go anywhere, never really stuck with users. Yeah. But I think it's very, very positive for them just because they can focus less on being like a research intelligence company. And this being open source and being competitive, and if this trend continues, it should be trivial for their developers to put like really, really quality AI LLM systems into their devices, which already live on the edge and already have distribution solved, right? If I'm looking at like what category of tech is most exciting to me, but as a result of this thing, it's edge computing related stuff. And right now, the owner of edge is Apple. Like they are the ones who live there.
Yeah. To me, the market reaction is characteristic of a larger sentiment, which is that there is an AI quote unquote bubble forming and these valuations with specific respect to profit earning ratios and kind of your traditional business fundamental metrics are simply out over their skis. And this was the first counter narrative to this unfiltered, unguarded growth in AI. And so this was the first market opportunity for people to take chips off of the table in what had otherwise been kind of nothing but up and to the right for NVIDIA and similar stocks like it. My personal opinion is similar to yours, Shashi, in that this to me felt like a buying opportunity for NVIDIA. And it's a nice segue to remind people that this is not financial advice. This is just kind of us chronicling our own decisions here. But in any event, I actually fundamentally agree with your assessment. I think NVIDIA is still, they're riding massive tailwinds. They're still heading into a reality in which there is an over demand of the GPU supply they can actually execute against, and they have no issue selling these to kind of the highest bidder in at least in the short term, short to medium term.
One thing I will comment on that I think is really unique about what DeepSeek is NVIDIA they've made themselves very, very vertical in like what is the space of like AI and training and all that sort of stuff, right? And a very big part of that is CUDA, which is kind of like the runtime that manages like how does your program run on a GPU. And that's proprietary. It is a closed source thing that NVIDIA owns, but kind of like they get so much adoption, like user retention, basically, because they're researchers who are going from universities studying AI, using CUDA all the time, or going then to enterprise, and they're like, why would we use anything that's not CUDA? DeepSeek actually was built not using CUDA. They went down to the more metal, like parallel execution code that is open source on NVIDIA and trained it that way. I'm not saying that as like a dink against NVIDIA and like what it means for their market position, but I think it's also notable to observe that that's the first time that something this significant has happened without CUDA effectively. Like the first time that we've seen a use case of like someone actively ignoring CUDA and coming up with something this impressive, which is, if anything, just kudos to the researchers.
This is a strategic priority for the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, to have strength in this space. And so I wouldn't be surprised at all if there is a company in China, perhaps Huawei, perhaps someone else, who's building a really substantial competitor to NVIDIA. And that kind of insight may have also been a part of the calculation for the DeepSeek team to bypass CUDA and build their own kind of direct path to the underlying, what is it, TSX or something, underlying machine language code below CUDA. That kind of news wouldn't shock me, and that kind of news would probably cause NVIDIA stock to drop substantially. There is a timeline in which, going forward, we have a set of winners in the East and a set of winners in the West. And that may be a different set. There may, because of the national security emphasis of semiconductors and AI, there may be a set of companies that are the big winners in the Eastern Hemisphere. Perhaps that's a company like DeepSeek. Perhaps it's a semiconductor company that is China first. And there may be another set, perhaps NVIDIA, perhaps Tesla, perhaps Llama, that are the set of winners in the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable assumption. I think the thing that's interesting, I think mostly for me to think about is like what happens in the open source ecosystem, because again, our Western like framework for AI is mostly closed source, Llama being the exception. But it's not like the average consumer is using Llama, right? It's at best you're a developer who is in this space and you're using Llama to save yourself on costs. I think that's probably the biggest threat to what the enterprise provider is now that we've seen like the open source base is potentially more capable and will allow you to make that transition sooner, right? I think it's interesting and dynamic, I think, to imagine what that like Western Eastern dynamic is like if China continues to release their stuff open source, because it's just so fundamentally undermining about like what is the play pattern with an AI tool, right? If you're a government, if you're an enterprise, odds are you'll probably go to one of the big providers first. You'll go to OpenAI, you'll go to Anthropic. But if you're a pipsqueak startup trying to like change the world or something, all of a sudden I think the conversation has switched to, why do I pay for OpenAI O1 tokens? I'm just going to hop straight to DeepSeek and get started, boots off the ground, much, much quicker.
Yeah, I want to pull on the Apple thread too, because I think there's a bull case to be made. I'm not sure that I believe this, but I think if I was going to play devil's advocate to the bear case that you presented, Shashi, it would be that, as Lakshay described, compute on the edge is effectively owned by Apple. You can argue, Samsung or Google and other Android providers, but for the large part of it, especially in the United States, it's an iPhone dominated market. There's the additional iPad and all the other things that we all use, AirPods and Apple Watches and Apple TVs and Apple Vision Pro, which has been kind of objectively a flop, but maybe a new platform for developers in their spatial OS and otherwise. If we see significant progress in open source, that to me leans more Apple and Meta as opposed to Google or Microsoft, who have been kind of large spenders, even Amazon for that matter, who has been a large investor in Anthropic. But the more powerful these open source models become, the more leverage the people who actually have the edge computing devices, Apple or otherwise, are going to have. And in that model, it actually feels like Apple is well positioned because they're sitting on essentially the most cash in the world. They can deploy their resources how they like to. They have a recurring user base. Yes, people are buying iPhones at essentially the same rate they have been over the last decade. But again, there's proliferation and there's increase in other devices. And we're seeing kind of plays in healthcare as the Apple Watch and other kind of accessory devices gain FDA approval for various heart arrhythmias and things like that. So again, I'm not necessarily advocating that this is my position. More or less, I'm just saying Apple still feels like they're coming from a position of strength, even if you, and I think properly articulated that the iPhone in itself is the most important driver for Apple, and it is stagnant at best, declining is probably more accurate.
But what's the, like, explain it to me. Why do I care if my edge compute, like if my phone can run a model or not? Like, unless you're saying you're going to be in a situation where you don't have the internet, because I'm fine with the browser being my primary interface point to any and every large language model. What's the use case where I care that it's running locally?
Speed is the consumer answer.
I think if you assume a instance where the idea of like an agentic operator, things that are running in the background, able to act on your behalf and think in the longer term, I think that happens because of like your iPhone has a built-in scheduler, is able to look at your emails coming in, can process and summarize on device, right? I think the bullish case on Apple to me is one where we assume that the bloody water exists mostly in the infrastructure hosting space, like all of Anthropic, OpenAI, open source. They're all competing for land share of how people are using their models. But I think the place that's most valuable to be at the end of the day, if that's all kind of saturated, is where are people's attentions? Like where is the data channel and who gets to keep that data? And I think it's very, very obvious to me, at least, that like Apple can do as much as they want, especially since they kind of get to control their own privacy and compliance limitations.
I just don't get why I would use anything on device. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. At least if I want something. So if I want code, for example, I'd rather go to my desktop, interact with cursor. I'm not going to do that for my phone. I don't think. I guess I can't see a scenario where I care that could run locally. And then if I want something that's about messaging or something like that, like I'm just going to go to the direct app. I don't imagine using something that is built into Apple, even if it exists. It's sort of like Siri. Like, Siri is a great example. They spend a ton of marketing dollars. They spend a ton of product dollars improving Siri. What's the net result? Nothing, basically. Like, nobody likes Siri still. Nobody liked Siri before. Nobody likes Siri now. My kids, like, most of their interactions are like yelling at Siri for how bad it is. They still don't like Siri. So what was the point of all of this? Like, I don't get how Apple's edge market share translates into any kind of LLM based market share.
I think the way I look at that though is that the thing you're describing is mostly like a trained behavior, right? Like we've seen Siri sucks and we haven't learned to like think opposite, right? Or Apple hasn't given any reason for us to train ourselves in the opposite way, right? It's still a bad product. But if you look at like a hypothetical like sci-fi envisioning of the future, like your information lives in like a non-visual form, right? It's presented to you in ways that are quicker, right? Whether if you want to go as far as like neural, right? That sort of compute happens on edge. And for all you know, it might be like distributed across the wearables or the things in your environment that are able to like communicate over Bluetooth or a similar protocol to get work done for you in a way that's like hyper cheap and has no cost in like the longer term for the hosting company.
I could see, here's what I could imagine. I could imagine, just like we have Wi-Fi routers, we have NVIDIA GPUs for near edge compute that are, let's say, in a shopping mall, in a store you go visit, you're on their Wi-Fi or something, and you just jump onto their local compute and it does a bunch of the compute for you. I could imagine a scenario like that. I guess I don't know or see the use case. What's the use case in which I care that it's actually running on the device and not using web traffic?
I think the thing to discuss, I think, is the use case that's unlocked, because right now LMs are just being used for research, right? It's being used for summary and content finding and coding. But if you hop like one layer above that, right, you can imagine that like we could have tools that are able to like look at our notes, look at like the events we have coming up, like run research on their own in the background without a person getting involved in the loop. And if there's no person involved in the loop, background processing can happen on cloud or local. It's simply cheaper if it's local, and we're getting models that can run very effectively on local.
But I see that as like a Google use case. Google has my email. Google has my Google Docs. They know a ton about me. I see that as Google can do all of that server side and just continually drop the right information it needs to drop onto my phone. I don't know why the processing needs to be at my phone.
I think fundamentally it just breaks down to whether or not you believe in like the Internet of Things hypothesis or not. Like what you're essentially describing is a world in which like edge compute simply doesn't matter as much. Like there's kind of two things. Like in order to buy the bullish case on Apple, you kind of have to simultaneously buy that edge compute has some advantages. I think the argument that you're outlaying right now is that edge compute doesn't have very many advantages. I think it's a perfectly fine hypothesis. I think it's somewhat counter to the like pervasive narrative, which might be a great thing. But to me, edge compute can always know more about you in combination with cloud-based compute than cloud-based compute can know alone. Right? Like all the advantages that you're outlining for Google are correct, but everything your iPhone knows about you in addition to those things would be added contextual awareness. It feels more intuitive to me that the combination of edge compute and cloud compute is superior to cloud compute alone. And if you believe that hypothesis, there is a lane for whoever owns edge compute, Apple in this case, to have an advantage over the people who do not own edge compute.
Like what I can imagine is, so with Apple Intelligence, they already do this thing where your compute, it first, like the simple tasks go to local anyway, like whatever their local models are running, those try and solve the problem first. If it's too heavy of a problem, that goes to cloud to solve, right? The thing I think I can imagine most trivially, like just because the case is so prevalent, is if you're to bring something like LMs to healthcare, right? It is suddenly like much safer just at like a simple cybersecurity level if the data that needs to be processed, like understand like the scribe, like transcription of the meeting that doctor and a patient had, like doing basic reasoning and logic over that to come up with like EMR updates to then process that and like store it into like convert that into prescription I need to make. You could do that all without any of the data ever leaving the hospital in an edge computing case.
Right.
Whereas,
and that I totally buy. Actually, I buy that like an enterprise, a big enterprise like a hospital will need near edge compute, but it doesn't need to happen on the doctor's phone. It can happen in a way like a local router would happen at a hospital. You just have like a compute cluster right there in the hospital that handles all the compute for the hospital.
But you still need something to like record and the information, right? Like you still need some sort of speaker or something to intake the information to then send it to the cluster. So I guess the question then becomes,
these are IO devices.
Is it more likely that you're going to have a standalone speaker plugged into the cluster or that it's your iPhone?
Yeah, I think the phones will be the IO devices. Yeah. There'll be input and output. They'll send you telemetrics or whatever you need to send from the phone, but the near edge or the cloud will handle the heavy compute. I don't know. I guess I don't imagine the edge itself needing to be the actual computing.
I think the other cases that are not necessarily enterprisey are anybody that works with a heavy workload already that they're doing on their local machine, like graphic design or, AutoCADing or that kind of thing, where you're going to get AI applications that are running on local machines in which non-internet-based research, but the actual kind of making of things is happening on those devices as well, where it's not information processing, so to speak, but it's like, help me edit this video or something, right? You're not necessarily going to have cloud-based editors. Maybe you will. But again, I think fundamentally it is, do we have Internet of Things / edge compute or do we not? And then if so, depending on which one of those sides you fall on, I think it makes a more bull or more bear case for Apple and other competitors that may have kind of dominance in that market.
Did you see the Microsoft CEO attempt to buy DeepSeek?
No.
I'll share this to you.
$50,000 the whole thing. All you have to do is give me your hard drive with the code base on it. Oh, and the underlying rights to the code in perpetuity throughout the universe. Sign there. No. Okay. I like the way you negotiate. $100,000 final offer. Take it away.
He said, if oil company wants to buy a house, there's an oil underneath.
But I'm not an oil company.
No, you are Gavin Belson.
Oh, so you do know who I am.
I'm smart.
Nice play, Satya. Nice play.
Awesome. Well, that's a great place to end this week's episode. To everyone, thank you for joining us for the Scholar AI Founders Pod. Quick reminder to catch us on all the typical podcast locations and find us on our YouTube channel. Thanks for joining, and see you all next week.